Welcome back. Happening now, a bipartisan gun bill has traction in the U.S. Senate, and it shows promise of passing.
President Joe Biden said it would be the most significant gun safety legislation in decades if it is approved. This morning, we have a live interview with Republican Mississippi Senator Chris McDaniel.
Good morning, Senator McDaniel. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So first off, just want to ask, what are your thoughts on this bipartisan gun bill in the U.S. Senate?
Well, in short, if Joe Biden is supporting it, I'm going to have a difficult time not being suspicious. I mean, frankly, I wouldn't trust Joe Biden to walk my dog, much less protect the civil liberties of American citizens. The bottom line here is this. Every time we hear the word bipartisan, when we see people like Mitt Romney joining the other side, most of the time those bills that we see after that really aren't conducive to protecting our civil liberties. So we'll see what they pound out. I know right now they're discussing all the issues, but ultimately for people like me and for people that value the Constitution, we have to make absolutely certain that the Second Amendment is protected at all costs. It's non-negotiable. So until we see more of the details of the bill, it's going to be difficult to comment further. But ultimately, my job is to protect the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution, and that's what I intend to do.
And I know you said until we see more details, but from the details we have seen so far, are there any parts of it that you may agree with or think could be helpful?
That's just it. You know, when you comment on pending legislation, especially the way the United States Senate operates at this stage and the way the House is operating, you're almost commenting in the dark. Here's what I know. I know they're trying to bribe the states to pass red flag initiatives and red flag legislation. And there are different types of that legislation out there. Ultimately, we know, though, that some of that can be abused. And I'm not a fan of these open-ended red flag laws because ultimately people that could have been diagnosed with fairly simple psychological conditions like depression or anxiety could ultimately lose their gun rights in some of those systems. So whatever they pass, whatever they bribe the states to pass, we have to make absolutely certain that the Second Amendment is preserved and that the act can't be abused to deprive citizens of that right. And that's a really valuable situation because we're talking about the due process of every American citizen to exercise their fundamental rights in this country. If the red flag laws are too broad, if they're too aggressive, if the feds push too aggressively on the states to adopt these things, we could conceivably see people lose their rights when they don't need to lose their rights under the circumstances. So we have to see the details first, and we don't know what that is yet. But as a general rule, I'm not a fan of any prohibition or regulation on gun ownership unless there's seriously a mental health disorder or perhaps there's seriously an imminent or immediate threat that someone is possessing or intends to do something wrong. So until I see the details, it's just hard to comment further.
So now what's your reaction in terms of the 10 Republicans on board with the bill at this point?
Well, most of those Republicans have found ways to betray conservatism at one point or the other in their lives. So I'm not a big fan of this bipartisan concept of reaching across the aisle when it comes to a situation like civil liberties. And I'll give you an example. We recognize there's some problems in this country. We need more resources for mental health. We need to make sure these schools are secured. We need to make sure that people can defend themselves. And also, we need to understand there's a psychological and spiritual component to what's occurring here. We need to make sure people value one another again. They value life. And we know that traditional families typically can impart those lessons. We just have moved away from those traditional foundations of this country. So we find ourselves now in a very difficult situation because the feds say something has to be done. That's not always the proper solution. I don't trust the federal government to make the right decision here. I think the states have an interest and a role they can play here, and I wish the states would get involved to make sure that our children are safe and there are more mental health resources. But when the feds attempt a one-size-fits-all approach and they try to rush things through, ultimately, more often than not, it's our civil liberties that are sacrificed, and the American people lose some very valuable privileges and liberties in that stake. So I'm not a big fan of that at all. I want to see it. I want to see a more deliberative, state-by-state approach.
All right, well, Senator McDaniel, that's all the time we have this morning. Again, we do really appreciate your time spent with us. I know it's very early and you're very busy.
Well, I appreciate it very much, and anytime you need me, you let me know.